knew that this might be a total disaster, but I tried it anyways, and I still learned a lot of interesting things. So today I'll be sharing about poorly pigmented watercolor pencils, the warning signs that it might be a great idea to get yourself some better ones, and in the meantime, how to limit the damage on your art and still make it look good. So I've had this box of Art Philosophy pastel watercolor pencils for a while. And I usually love their watercolor related products as a former ambassador of theirs, but when I bought these, I knew they were going to be pale just because they're pastel colors. The problem was that I forgot about how a majority of the very cheap to very affordable watercolor pencils tend to behave on paper, just because I've been using the best brands for too long, as you can see in all my other videos. First thing I did was to swatch the pencils to get a feel for them. There are no color names for these, just numbers. I ran into a big problem right away with a lot of the colors barely even showing on paper, even after I activated the pigment. I wasn't feeling too confident, as you can imagine, but you'll see how the way we learn from any experience, even if it's not that great, really turned out to be true here. So I'm glad that I went for this flamingo painting anyways. And I had picked a reference with pastel colors, so I hoped that would do. But as soon as I started coloring with the pencils on my special palette with that rough texture that grabs pencil pigments really well, right away I saw how difficult it was to even get anything out of them, when normally this is a great weapon to get a lot of pigment very fast and make it look smooth on paper. With my Faber-Castell Arbusteur and the Caran d'Ache Aquarelle Museum pencils, the two types that I vouch for 100% when it comes to watercolor pencil quality, this is a very fast and easy task, even with a light pencil. Here, however, the leads were really dry and I struggled to get a swatch. When that was finally done, I wet the paper and I started painting a background. It's not too surprising that these pastel colors are so light in a way. The problem is I also found them to be very chalky, which is also something typical of pastel watercolors, and you know what I'm talking about if you tried them before. The result was that the background was very light and all my strokes dried in the way that I placed them. The colors didn't spread out or melt into the white of the paper that well at all. With the right supplies and a good water to paint ratio, your strokes shouldn't be visible on a wet sheet of paper like this one. I tried to fix it by wetting the sheet once more after it had dried to soften those spots, but it didn't even work here. So I decided to unleash my second weapon, the coloring technique. With pressure and layers, for sure you'd think that I'd get something great out of these pastel pencils. Well, what I realized, and I remember this happening with cheap watercolor pencils as well, and I'm talking about regular colors, not pastel colors, is that it can be very hard to layer with the wrong supplies. When with quality supplies, this is not only very easy, but also effective. I did manage to get some color on paper still, but I had to press like crazy for it to happen, and I even found that these areas I had applied pigment on before made it really hard to add anything new. They felt slippery, and I even found myself indenting the paper badly, as if even the paper was turning against me, which is something that never happened with my usual supplies. So a very low pigmentation, as well as a noticeable difficulty to layer more pigment on top of a painted area, are the warning signs you might want to upgrade your watercolor pencils to have a lot more fun and much better results. Luckily, I had picked that reference with light colors, but also very dark ones to contrast, because I had a plan, before even starting, to use my water-soluble graphite pencils by Faber-Castell. If you watch my videos, you know that I'm a huge fan. I even ran some tests and mixed a pastel color to a 4B water-soluble graphite pencil, but as you can see, the graphite overpowers the pastel pencil no matter which way I added it and the technique that I used. So I went into this fearing an even bigger disaster. And that's why I started including the water-soluble graphite on the flamingo without pressing too hard. I started with a 4B to add just a little bit of color and dimension to this pale painting. I was pleased with how that looked when I activated the pigment, so I went for more with the 8B pencil this time. I try to add it in strategic places and not overdo it. And if you'd like to try something like this for yourself, I shared the tutorial on my Patreon, and you can find a link in the description of the video. I tried another round of adding my pastel colors, and I pressed as hard as I could as my last chance to make these show in the final art piece, with a few more indentations and some visible coloring lines as a bonus that I decided would count as texture for this flamingo. I wanted to try and use the pastel watercolor pencils as regular colored pencils this time. It's an option that we always have with watercolor pencils, but since I like a smooth finish and these didn't really layer that well, I still had to activate that with water as an ultimate attempt to make things pop. And please tell me what you think about this. Do you like it or hate it? Have you tried such difficult watercolor pencils before? I usually love my art to look darker than this, but I'll admit that the final result isn't that unpleasant after all. The experience itself, however, was a bit painful. That's why I'll just stick to the best watercolor pencils on the market, and if I want to use pastel colors, I know that the watercolors from the same brand do a much better job, as you can see from these paintings here that I did a long time ago. If you enjoyed this video, I invite you to watch this one and see how I use water-soluble graphite in combination to my favorite watercolor pencils. I wish you a fantastic day wherever you are. Thank you for watching and see you next time.